Open Team Sheets is the format that competitive VGC Pokemon uses in Generation 9. That means that you have access to your opponent's moves, abilities, items, and Terra types. Basically everything except the opponent's stats. It's a pretty big change from what most people are used to. But so far, I've really liked Open Team Sheets. Even amongst competitive players, not everybody likes it, but I'm going to explain why I do. Fundamentally, Pokemon is a game of information. If you know everything about your opponent's team and they know nothing about you, you have a big advantage. Maybe you can surprise them with an unexpected choice scarf. Maybe you have a surprising Terra type or an unconventional item. The options are truly endless. As a result, scouting for information is an important part of the game. Especially in the context of a best of 3, which most tournaments are, you can do a lot of things to scout. For example, you can try and figure out information in Game 1 that you can later use in Game 2 or Game 3. I like the information game. It's rewarding to be able to think outside the box and trick your opponent. On Smogon, which uses competitive singles in a 6v6 format, I don't believe open team sheets are necessary or even good, except for Terra types. But in doubles, the official format, open team sheet does make the game better. There are two main reasons for that. But before I get into them, I just want to remind you to subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. There's been a lot of new viewers lately, and subscribing helps out the channel, keeps you updated, and doesn't cost you anything. Subscribing lets me know to keep making more VGC content. The number one reason for me is the speed of play and how costly incorrect plays can be. Because there's only 4 Pokemon, and doubles is inherently a quicker format because twice the damage is being dealt per turn, doubles games are typically much shorter than the average singles game. Each turn carries much more weight. In a closed team sheet format, you can make educated guesses about your opponent's team and what ideas they might have, but that's just it. Even the best players will end up having to make educated guesses about what their opponent can do. Especially with Terra types, you physically cannot make decisions that can cover the infinite number of possibilities of what your opponent can do, and you have to cover what you feel are the most likely. Sometimes though, you will just get them wrong. You're not a worse player because of it, it's just the inherent variance of the game. You can have the full knowledge that a Pokemon can be either Focus Sash or Choice Specs or Choice Scarf, and they can have 2 different potential Terra types, and you can make a decision that covers say most of them, but if you predict it wrong, you predict it wrong. Your decision can never be more than a logical guess. This isn't inherently bad, and it's part of what makes Pokemon fun. Information warfare to get an edge over your opponent. That is skill in and of itself. The element of surprise is a valuable tool, and I encourage people to harness that. I like it when that happens. It's really cool when someone uses an unorthodox strategy to get wins, and information management adds another layer of depth to the game. However, there's a line between how much information warfare is too much. In a theoretical extreme, if the game becomes too much about guessing, then you might as well be rolling dice, and it's not a very fun game competitively. In the other extreme, if every game's outcome is determined before it even starts, that's not fun either. A little volatility is good, but a lot is not. Smogon gameplay does not cross that line for me for the most part because the information game doesn't cause high swings of variance. You can spend more time scouting to figure out your opponent's team. The information you get on turn 4 can be useful on turn 44. Even if you get surprised and lose a Pokemon, you still have 5 left to make a comeback. The games being longer means that surprise factor is more balanced. You can still use surprise factor in singles to get a win, and it's still a deadly asset to have, but it's not overwhelming to the game state. If someone truly surprises me and gets the win, good for them, they outplayed me. I didn't do enough to scout and they were a better team builder. In VGC, on the other hand, knowledge is so much more valuable. Every turn in a shorter game is so influential that wasting even one turn could be catastrophic. A very basic example is Covert Cloak, a new item in Generation 9 that blocks secondary effects. Notably, it blocks the speed drop from Icy Wind or the immobilization from Fake Out. You can be aware that Covert Cloak is a valid option on a lot of Pokemon, but if you want to use Fake Out or Icy Wind, you're going to have to take a chance on something at some point. If you count on a Fake Out stopping the opponent and it doesn't happen, you could get punished really hard. You could take the time to scout for Pokemon to reveal their item, but that costs valuable time in a short game. Oftentimes you will have to take educated gambles, and by definition, they won't always work. Covert Cloak is just one example, but there are quite a few sources of high volatility. For example, it can be incredibly easy to get surprise KOs with Terrestrialization, Weakness Policy, and a fast Pokemon, like Joe Biden's Terra Ghost Iron Treads with Shadow Sneak Sableye. Terrestrialization in particular adds a lot of volatility not seen in previous generations. Every Pokemon is so valuable when you only have 4 compared to 6, and that makes surprise KOs extremely deadly. That loss of 1 tempo or 1 Pokemon in singles isn't typically game-breaking, while in doubles it is. Overall, the format is more volatile with so much weight on each individual turn. Closed Team Sheet VGC crosses that volatility line for me, and as a result I liked Open Team Sheet. It felt more like a game of strategy than a game of luck. My opponent knows what I have and I know what they have, and it's a battle of wits to see who has a better strategy. There was still enough room to surprise your opponent with EV spreads, but obviously that's nowhere near the magnitude of Closed Team Sheet. Overall, it felt more like a competitive game, and the cost paid for that was very minimal. The value lost was that more gimmicky teams took a hit. But while team building, I still felt like there were a lot of options for creativity. Just look at all the unique teams in the top 32 of events which had unique Pokemon like Wolfie Glick's Screamtail. OTS changed the way creativity was expressed, but you could still be creative. The main criticism of OTS is that it limits creativity, and I have not found that to be true. The second reason is scouting. In a VGC tournament, you can't change your team in between rounds. That means that the team you use in round 1 is exactly the same as the team you use in the last round. That means that if you play someone in round 1, it's very likely if that you play that person's friend in a later round, that friend knows your team. This is a reality of a real-life tournament structure. Very realistically, your team will be known to your opponents by the later rounds and vice versa. The more well-connected you are, the more likely it is you'll have access to your opponent's team. It also works the other way too. The more famous you are, the more people are interested in what team you're using. For example, Wolf Glick using Perish Trap is much more likely to come up in casual conversation. A tragic development from the closed team sheet era was that you actually didn't want to play your games on the official broadcast stream, because then everyone watching would know your team. In fact, back when the 3DS was a main console, it was actually optimal to use a digital cartridge instead of a physical cartridge, because the hardware limitations of the streaming setup meant that they could only stream if at least one of the cartridges was a physical cartridge. You would use a digital game, that way if your opponent also happened to have a digital cartridge, your game physically could not be put on stream and you could avoid exposing your team like that. This led to some unfortunate situations. Ordinarily, if it's finals or something relevant, they would have you trade your Pokemon to a physical cartridge for a streamed game, but they wouldn't bother doing that for the middle rounds. In the 2018 World Semifinals, both players had a digital cartridge and both players were using Return Snorlax. Trading a Pokemon would reset the happiness, so that wasn't an option, and the World Semis game had to be played without being streamed, and those games are now lost to history. Obviously, this particular scenario wouldn't happen in the Nintendo Switch era, but it would still be a disadvantage to be put on stream in the closed team sheet format. If you're counting on surprise factor to carry you, you have to be prepared for the fact that it won't exist by the time you reach the later rounds anyway. What can even be more frustrating is that you don't know how much your opponent knows about your team, and that can affect how you play. It's a whole mess of a situation, and the scouting scene is a game outside the game. Tournaments have real awards, points, clout, and prize money, and you'd be very naive to think scouting does not happen in a systematic way, especially at more important tournaments like Worlds. Scouting has real implications on the way you play and for the tournament as a whole. The exact impact of scouting depends on who you talk to. Some people might think it's really important and some people might think it's overblown, but it definitely exists in some format. But here's the thing. Everything about scouting that I've described so far is secondhand information from people I've talked to while researching for this video. I've never had to experience it myself because I played in an open team sheet tournament. I never had to worry about scouting at all, and even though it was my first tournament and therefore I didn't know a lot of people there, it didn't negatively impact me. I never had to play a game where someone with more friends than me had a knowledge advantage, or I had a knowledge advantage because my opponent happened to play on stream. I view open team sheets removing the scouting metagame as a good thing because it means no one has an advantage from external factors. These two reasons are why I prefer the OTS format at VGC. The increase in consistency is worth the slight loss in unpredictability, and scouting being nerfed is a good thing. What do you think of Open Team Sheet? Let me know down in the comment section below.